Hello and welcome to episode 25 of The Board. I'm Gavin Coughlin, Agile Coach at Boost New Media. I'm joined by
Kirsten Donaldson, Agile Coach at Boost New Media.
And Paul Llewellyn, also an Agile Coach at Boost New Media and Boost Agile.
And today we are going to be talking about, we read a blog post by, was it Jeff Sutherland?
I believe so.
Yeah, and he was basically put out there to define agility or to define Agile, which created a few interesting conversations.
It's a competition he's put up, isn't it?
Yeah,
so what is it? Defining Agile in a couple of sentences, and the prize is $150.
Yep,
is that right?
Yep,
that's right.
So pretty cheap prize, but still.
It's the challenge that's appealed to us.
Yes, so we have had quite a few conversations about it. It really got me thinking about how to define Agile, and it's a tough one. Personally speaking, defining Agile in a sentence is almost impossible, actually, and because it is a set of 12 principles and 4 values. But to get me thinking about it, I was thinking if somebody came up to me at a party and said, "What do you do?" and I said, "I'm an Agile coach," and they said, "Oh, what's Agile?" I don't want to spell off 12 principles and 4 values to them.
Right.
Could you remember them in that context?
Of course, I can remember them. But they would start to slowly walk backwards away from me.
Possibly,
if I start to recite them. So, how would I quickly describe that to them in a sentence?
Go on then, give it to us.
Well, like I said, I've been thinking about how to do it in a sentence. I've got many different sentences. The one I last thought of before I came in to do this episode of The Board was creating happy, high-performing teams committed to creating the best product possible.
Okay.
Because a lot of it for me is about team-based things. But I asked my wife about it this morning. I said, how, because she's a CEO, product owner, I suppose, in some projects, and I said, how would you define Agile? She said it's a project management methodology for creating software.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I had a bit of a think about this. We had a chat before we started today. So we'll just go around the room, shall we?
Yeah.
And I'm a kind of a brief explanation succinct kind of person.
Yes.
So my one was, if I was asked at a party, it's a highly collaborative way of working that allows teams to be self-managing.
Yeah.
I'm all about the briefness, but I don't think that fully explains it, but it might give someone a flavour of what it is.
Yeah.
And what about you, Paul?
Just before I tell you what my definition is, because
you've got some preamble.
Well, Jeff was talking about it in his blog post, saying that the problem, because I think this is in response to at least one management review paper of Agile, and they're saying the biggest problem with the Agile movement is the ability to define Agile.
Right.
And and so to them it's not a real science because you can't define it and so on. And
does that matter?
I don't know if it does. So the key thing for me that crops up when I think about Agile is being responsive to change, and that's really how I define Agile, being responsive to change.
And the ability to be responsive to change.
Yeah, that's right, the ability to be responsive to change.
That's very succinct.
Yeah.
That is,
Like it.
I mean, the definition that somebody said to me this morning about it being a project management methodology, that would be, while it's not something that we agree with, it's something that would work in say, a party situation when you talk to somebody, and it would give them an understanding of what you mean, because responding to change, somebody in the party might still think, what I still don't know what that means, and creating collaborative teams.
So maybe what your wife said this morning, which is technically true, could be the start of the sentence.
Yes.
And then elaborate with what you've just said, or what I've just said, or what you've just said.
It's an adaptive program, project management method used, for being responsive to change, blah blah blah, and so on. Just go on. I don't know. Jeff's looking for. He was looking for your definition to fit inside a tweet.
Yes.
He wants it to be a soundbite that sums it up, right?
That's right. Yeah. So it has to be succinct.
Yeah, and I think the analogy of being at a party and someone asking you fits well for trying to achieve that.
Yeah, because that's something that honestly does happen quite a lot. Because when you say you're an Agile coach, it's still not something that people have a great level of awareness about outside of this industry. So it's a question that you do get quite a lot. I'd be interested in anybody who's watching, actually, if you have something like a tweet size sentence that you think you could use to define Agile, please do let us know through the chat on live stream, because it'd be very interesting.
Or alternatively, you could tweet it to us at Boost New Media or Boost Agile.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested to see what comes up, what people come up with for the competition, and how people do, because I've read some of the stuff that people have been discussing already in the comments, and a lot of people talk about the responding to change thing and being able to pivot with the least amount of pain and stuff like that, which is all very, very true, but also leaves out so much.
I guess that's right.
Because to me the team level stuff and the interactions and the communication between the team and everybody else involved in the project is a huge part of it for me, but it's difficult to put into a sentence.
Yeah, totally.
I think I'm going to have trouble receiving chat messages today, but if I do see them come through, I'll talk about them.
Okay,
but
cool.
I'm having some connection issues here, so
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So what was the next item on the list we were going to talk about today?
Well, I mean, that talking about that yesterday led us to think about some other topics, and it got us talking yesterday as well about the art of the possible, which is something that we come up with here quite a lot. We try to impress on the people who work with us that you have to think about the art of the possible. And when people come to you with an idea or something that they want to achieve, an outcome that they want to achieve, you can't just say, well, you try to avoid saying, we can't do that because we can't do this because such and such is in place. You think about the outcome that people want to get about it, and you really think hard about what's possible. You try to ignore the impossible and think about what's possible.
That's right.
And it's quite a good way to.
And I actually read a good quote about that this morning on a thing Ken Schwaber had written, directly related to Scrum. He says, Scrum employs the art of the possible, taking advantage of opportunities and avoiding roadblocks, being agile. Which again relates back to what we were saying about defining agile a little bit as well. Sort of saying the main things that we're trying to do while incorporating that idea of the art of the possible. So I thought it was quite nice.
Yeah, this kind of segues quite nicely into my sort of pet subject at the moment, which is Canva, and the
nicely pronounced.
The sense making framework. It's
it sounds Welsh to me.
It is Welsh. And it does mean habitat apparently, but it means habitat of multiple belongings. And Dave Snowden, who described this framework, has spent a lot of time working on this. It's based on other practices or models that came out of IBM. In 2005, he left IBM and set up a company called Cognitive Edge. But anyway, they've developed this sense-making model. And he defines sense-making models as different from categorization models. In categorization, he says the framework precedes the data. And so what happens is you describe your framework first, and then you try and fit your data into those different categories. And so, but sometimes not all of the data fits. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, that kind of thing. And so the framework doesn't cover everything, essentially. Whereas a sense-making framework, the data precedes the framework.
So it's about identifying data first and then looking at it.
That's right. And the framework they've come up with, I've printed out a big version of this, but this is the Canva framework. It's actually 5 categories. So there's the 4 categories around the outside, then the final category in the middle, which is disorder. And disorder means you just haven't categorized it yet. That's something you don't know which space it's in. And so this is the art of the possible. Sort of, if the problem you're dealing with is simple, then the bottom segment here, then it's something that you know. There's a clear.
Do you want to hold that?
Yeah, sure. There's a clear connection between cause and effect, and so you do something, it has that effect. You know what that is, and so it's well understood, and it allows you to approach solving that problem in a best practice kind of way. As the problem gets more complicated, it requires a deeper knowledge, and this is where you usually get experts involved. An expert in a certain field will get involved, and they will sense, analyze, and respond. So they will do some analysis work essentially around the complicated problem, and it allows good practice to be put in place. I.e., the expert is an analytical, or an expert approach is to be analytical, and you can apply good practice in your analysis. Then you move to the complex over here. Complex is the examples that Dave gives around this is like battlefield or politics. Where you've got there's no clear connection between cause and effect, or you only know you can only see the connection in retrospect. And so in this instance, you probe, sense, and respond, and your approach is emergent. which is really ties in. I think, and I'll talk about chaotic finally. Chaotic is where if you enter this deliberately, then you're innovating, and if you enter it accidentally, it's usually an emergency response, and you have to work out. You have to do something as quickly as possible to try and get it back into one of these other states before you can continue. So you're act, sense, and responding, and so it's a novel. The practice in that quadrant is novel. You're making it up as you go.
So I have a question about this because I don't know as much about Canva as you do.
Yeah.
Is it about identifying what type of problem you have via these categories, and then this gives you a way of responding?
Responding, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think in the agile, in software, and obviously there's people that mix software and hardware as well, or that we're sitting somewhere between the complex and the complicated spaces. And so we've got a lot of experts who will analyse and try to determine what can be done up front. And this is sort of the waterfall approach, where you do a lot of upfront design analysis and design work with experts like software architects and so on, to determine what's possible. The complex approach is where you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the expert. You have to conduct experiments, and if the experiment works, you amplify it. And if it fails, you dampen the experiment. And so you're creating this sort of, I think Dave calls it safe fail environment.
So that would include, using things
Safe
like
to fail,
just-in-time learning. So you're saying it's people that aren't experts. So
That's right.
So people that perhaps don't cover a broad range.
Yeah.
Or they do, but not to a great depth, and then they just learn what they need to learn as it comes up in this situation.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And so we do sit between these two spaces. In an agile world, though, I think we're more in the complex, because we accept, things are possible. Whatever we can do, we can definitely achieve something, but we don't know exactly what that is. So let's experiment, and we conduct empirical experiments, and we determine what works and what doesn't work, and we do that in the shortest possible time, and we get feedback fast.
Yeah.
And if we fail fast, then we've succeeded in learning and moving on very quickly.
And that really does bring in the art of the possible, because all of those experiments are embracing that.
That's right.
Art of the possible, aren't they?
And so it's exactly. So you're not saying what's impossible. You're saying, we don't know what to do in this situation. Let's try something and see if it works. If it doesn't work, if it does work, then let's carry on doing that. If it doesn't work, then we'll find something else to do.
And have you been using the Canva model?
I have it in the back of my mind. I don't coach it that much because I think it confuses people. I think people are quite happy sitting in that space, in the complicated space, because we are constantly innovating.
So I guess we can do it without making it overt and putting it within the framework, right? Unless it's needed.
Yeah, but sometimes when we talk about what's possible and what's not possible, I will fall back to this and start trying to describe some of the concepts to the team, so that they can understand that they don't have to be stuck in the complex approach. They can move.
They don't have to know everything immediately.
No, and that's what agile teams succeed so well in doing, because they build courage. And courage to tackle something that you don't know how to do. Absolutely,
because people have confidence in things that they're very good at.
Yeah.
But this lets you not worry so much about that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And when you've got the expert approach, it's the responsibility is on one person.
Quite often,
and they don't always get it right.
Yeah.
And
so it sort of goes against the ideas of team responsibility for what's being produced.
That's right. Yeah.
It's interesting.
And the experts often are removed from solving the problem as well, and so they'll often be higher level in a general or an architect, sitting away from actually doing the work. They'll be involved, but they won't be actually doing any of the work or solving any of the problems.
A bit like a project manager.
Yeah. So when it comes to change, then the response, with an expert in place, you have to go back up the chain of command to find out what this doesn't work. What next? Whereas if you've got the adaptive agile approach, you're making decisions locally within a set of guidelines, parameters. Like you've only got 2 weeks to.
Well, and that's really eliminating the delays, because
right.
the problem with going back up the chain is it just causes major delays quite often.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
So with the iteration lengths being only 2 weeks, you're setting up that safe to fail environment, and allowing the teams to experiment and find out what's possible.
Cool. Another thing that came out of the whole discussion around defining agile was how you tell if a team is agile, because we go into a lot of companies and we talk to a lot of people who say, yeah, we're agile, but maybe you guys could come in and talk to us, a little bit about something. And we go into companies and we do training courses, and sometimes, all the time, we talk to people before we go in to see what they want to know, what they need to know,
where they're at.
Yeah,
that's right.
Where their gaps of information are. And a lot of people, when they say they're agile, you go in and you really find out that's not exactly the case. It might be, just doing stand-ups or just be working in iterations, but they're not a fully agile company. So one thing we do now, or one idea we have to do, is to do an agile health checklist before you go into a company. And I quite like the idea of that, having a checklist that people can look at. They can say, yes, we do this, no, we don't do this, and you get a fairly good overview of where things are working and where things are falling down a little bit for companies.
It's just really great to draw that information out in a non-threatening way, just fill out a form kind of thing. It's quite a simple thing for them to do, and the question's very definite. You either do this or you don't do this, and that's how we're able to draw out exactly where they're at without sort of disillusioning them as to where they are at.
Oh, that's right. And there's a Scrum checklist, which you can, I think if you just Google Scrum checklist, it's one of the first results, and that's a very good...
Yeah, I think that's on version 1's website.
Yeah.
So version 1 make a really... they make software for managing agile projects, and they have a checklist on... I think that's the one you're referring to.
Possibly. Yeah. But that's sort of 2 columns on that checklist, and one column is everything you sort of need to do to be doing Scrum, like you're doing your 15-minute stand-ups, and you're doing sprint review and retrospective, you have a product owner, etc. And then the column on the right is the things that aren't implicit in, say, the Scrum guidelines, but they're things you really should be doing to really make it work.
Things that aren't explicit, you mean?
Yeah, explicit, yeah.
Yeah.
That's very implicit, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the opposite of explicit.
Okay, yes. So it's a really good checklist to give to people when you're first going in there, to get a good idea of how they're doing it with Scrum. And we've talked about an agile health checklist.
It's something that we could do in a brainstorming session one day and put some things down and see how it works. Again, experimenting with what works better in terms of drawing that information out from our potential clients.
Yeah, exactly.
So that might be something good for us to do.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if anybody ever has seen that Scrum checklist or has ever used it, and if you feel it's actually valuable. Personally, I do find it's quite valuable. Sometimes, not all the time, so when you're just going into a company and meeting for the first time. Another thing that we came across this week was a blog post about, I'm not sure where this one came from, Scrum in China.
Can Scrum work in China?
Oh yes. And where did we find that blog post? Was that a... Ken Schwaber, was it?
Thanks, Joe. It's something that Joe identified that Ken Schwaber had written, and actually I think that quote was from the one I did earlier about the art of the possible.
It's an important question for us because we have an office in China, so we are using Scrum in China.
When we're doing agile training, specifically Scrum in China. And actually, probably in the next episode of the board, we're going to do an interview with our CEO at Boost Agile in China to talk to him about a couple of things, implementing Agile at scale with large companies, but also differences in working in China and in New Zealand, for example.
I think people see a lot of problems with Scrum in China because of the very strict hierarchy you see in a lot of companies in China, and they don't really see how that will work with Agile.
So it'd be interesting to hear more firsthand from Jake about how that does work.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that he's working with some large US companies, but they do have Chinese national developers. So,
I mean, interestingly enough, when I was in the States, I was talking to a group of people at the training session I was on, and they were I think there is a very different mentality in New Zealand compared to other countries, because we're a pioneer kind of country, and we had to make do with what we had, because we got,
there wasn't anything here.
There wasn't anything here.
Yeah.
And the next ship was months away.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. And so we have a very can-do attitude, and we will, and people in New Zealand will often pick up and do other people's what was perceived as a specialist skill. You'll find people doing a range of specialist skills. Whereas coming from a UK environment, you get we have this kind of, we silo people, and we say, well, you're this, you're the data warehouse expert, you're the report writing expert, and so on. And so I think New Zealand is a great place for Scrum, because we already have that mentality.
And I think, though, in the UK, people do appreciate people who can do a little bit of everything. It's just not the norm.
It's not the norm, that's right. And and I think, having done a bit of, I've only been to China briefly, but having done some training for, working in China, operating a business within China, I think the key thing was the hierarchy, and I think it is more pronounced in China, but just because, and we tend to work in a flat structure in a Scrum environment, and people don't really have, it's role based rather, but we can pick up that role, and people can pick up the roles.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
No, it's just interesting, because I was at the Agile conference last year, and a lot of people came up and asked us about how it's going in China, and a lot of people have very preconceived notions of what China's like, and a lot of them are completely unfounded, really, but that's just the picture some people have of how things work in China, and you don't really know until you're actually on the ground there.
I mean, surely there's similarities in that hierarchical way of working to perhaps working in a large government department.
Oh, no, totally.
So you've still got those reporting lines, and that's something that I know a lot of people are thinking about. We want to be more agile. How can we do it and still work with those reporting lines? So same sort of challenges.
That's right. Most large companies, or most government organisations, big organisations, will align by function. And so they're siloing their functions, by using the hierarchy. And so then, because Scrum teams are cross-functional, and they achieve so much so quickly by being cross-functional, you then have this kind of thing that the Scaled Agile framework, and I'm sure other people describe as being finding the kidney within the organisation. You're looking for the value stream, and you're looking for everybody that's involved touching the project within the value stream of the organisation.
Or what do you mean by finding the kidney? Finding
the kidney is where you're saying, so you've got these hierarchies of people, testers, developers, analysis, so BAs and so on, and they report upwards, but they have to cooperate crossways to get anything achieved. And so the kidney is circling all of the people that are involved with a particular product, for example, within the organisation.
The people that need to work across ways.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
And that all needs to report up to, say, project director, CEO, minister. Yeah.
That's right. So they've got their different reports, but they're obviously responsible for delivering a project as well, which becomes a bit of a conflict sometimes within, because you've got the hierarchical versus the value stream, as it's called, the product that you're working on. And so Tom and Mary Poppendeck talk a lot about this, finding your value stream and working out where your touch points are within your system. So everything you need to do to get a product from concept to at the door in the customer's hand, every touch point that has to go through in your organisation, and then all of the delays that happen within that process as well, because hierarchy and siloing often means delay.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not an insurmountable issue working with these structures. I mean, I know that at the moment there's quite a lot of interest in it around New Zealand and government departments, to the point where there's a few organisations who are getting together as a group, Agile Connect, to talk about how they can achieve this.
That's right.
Which is a great step, to have people from cross government departments looking at it together and thinking, even collaborating to think about how they can make this work.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a huge step forward, I think.
I mean, and it's a case of this educating and management understanding the sort of lean concepts that are behind this agile approach.
Well, it's absolutely about engaging those higher levels
And
as well, isn't it?
That's right, and making those guys stakeholders in the project so that they have responsibility and they still have a voice within the project, but they understand that for the value to flow out of the door, you have to optimize your value stream, or your value chain is called sometimes, the steps that you go through to move the product to completion.
Which brings us on to really how lean relates to agility.
That's right.
The idea of getting products to market quickly and looking at minimum viable products, and then getting feedback to decide next steps and next iterations. Which I think traditionally projects haven't been organised that way. There is that whole speccing up front, and the assumption that this is absolutely what we're going to need at the end of the period of development. So I mean, again, government departments are looking, it seems to me, at lean principles as well as part of the agile movement, to get things out quicker and to provide products that people want to use.
That's right. There's an interesting book by Don Reinertsen, which is called The Principles of Product Development Flow.
Right.
And he basically is an economist, and he said you have to base all of your decisions in economics, and he says the one thing that you should analyse, if anything, in your organisation is the cost of delay. And so you have to. It's not that delays can be acceptable, but they have to be managed and understood and
identified.
And what is the cost of that delay? So so it's just a really interesting approach. It's basically the really quick example he gives is somebody wanting to invest some money into a 3-year high interest bank deposit, and but they've got some things going on at the moment that requires they need some fluidity around their cash, and they can't lock it up for 3 years, so they're waiting for 3 months before they invest in this 3-year deposit.
So they're going to. What's the cost of the interest loss on that?
That's right. So the cost of delay is the 3 months of interest they would not accrue.
Yeah. So they need to weigh that up against their need to be flexible.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I suppose
that's a good analogy.
We were talking to somebody recently. We were talking about government departments and how they work, and sometimes government departments are not about delivery; they're about following a process and going through a process. And
I think that's really looking at, if you're working with government partners, is really looking at what their aims on a project are compared to what we think they are.
Well, yes.
Which is we quite often forget, particularly because we work in a certain way. So we need to be able to satisfy their aims as well as getting a product out the door.
Cool. Okay, I think that's us
we're done for today. So as I say, hopefully next week we can incorporate our interview with Jake, our CEO at Boost Agile in China, so we can learn more about the challenges he faces over there and working with scaled agile implementations.
We'll be asking some questions, and if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask
absolutely
about Agile in China, please do send them through.
Just drop a line to info@boost.co.nz and we'll try to incorporate those into the interview.
Okay. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thanks for joining us.
See you.